Hey, it's Mailbag Wednesday, getting to listener comments and questions regarding second base. Pedro Grifol, Jake Berger in the starting rotation. Yoan Moncada is not moving back to second base. So, can Jake Berger win a roster spot by switching positions? It's highly unlikely. I'm also going to tell you why it's an outside chance that Jake Berger will even make the ball club out of spring training.
You are Locked On White Sox, your daily Chicago White Sox podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, Sox fans, welcome to Locked On White Sox. Thank you for making Locked On White Sox your first listen each and every day. We're free and available on all platforms. Follow us on Twitter at Locked On Sox. Also, subscribe to our YouTube channel. Just search Locked On White Sox. This episode is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook, official sportsbook of Locked On. Make every moment more. Visit fanduel.com/lockedon today to get started. Hey, I'm your host, Nick Morawski, a lifelong diehard Chicago White Sox fan, recording this podcast just blocks from the ballpark in beautiful Bridgeport. You can find me on Twitter at Nick_GGTV. Locked On White Sox is part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. If the White Sox were to orchestrate a trade and find some way to bring in a starting second baseman, I've got some potential options to pour over. Jake Berger seems to be a man without a home, and 35th and Shields might not work out either this season. The pressure is on Pedro Grifol, Benintendi, and Vaughn. But what about the starting rotation? Hey, welcome back to Locked On White Sox. Today is the day. Pitchers and catchers reporting to Camelback Ranch in Glendale, Arizona. Hey, I appreciate you passing this podcast along to other White Sox fans in your life. It is Mailbag Wednesday. I've received a lot of great comments and questions and predictions and just theories over the last week or so through some YouTube comments on social media and also at LockedOnSox@gmail. So thank you so very much for the support, for the listenership, and really interested in what you have to think about this upcoming White Sox season, the spring training. We've been covering a lot of, the hopes, the potential, and got a great email from Jim. Jim, really appreciate you reaching out. And Jim, had a lot that, he was, concerned about. And I echo all of those sentiments. And one thing Jim had said is, as to 2023, I think I am placing most of my hope in Pedro Grifol. And I probably wouldn't have said that when he first was hired. And it's still, as we talk today, it still boggles my mind that that's the guy that they landed on with all of the qualifications that Rick Hahn talked about during the managerial search. This is what we're looking for and all this stuff. And I guess I shouldn't read too much into what Rick Hahn has to say, but Pedro Grifol's the guy. He knocked the interview out of the ballpark. Merkin has got a recent article just about everything he went through and how he felt during that process, and that this was the place for him. And he's been winning me over more and more by what he's been saying, and the folks that he's surrounding himself with. And this is something that Dylan Cease had to say, a guy that I'm really hopeful about in 2023. This is Cease and Pedro Grifol. He introduced himself and kind of let me know how he likes to do things and how he likes to build relationships. And communication is huge with him, which is really important for his job. I have had a guy come up to me where I train, and he spoke extremely highly of him. He basically said, I was hoping we were going to hire him as a manager. We all love that guy. He comes with a lot of positives being said about him. I look forward to building that relationship with him. And Cease in those statements, in that quote there, really hit on a lot of what I've noticed, and I'm sure you have as well. Communication. Grifol talks about building relationships, clear communication with his coaching staff. Everybody's on the same page, and delivering his message clearly to his players, which is what he's going to start doing in Glendale, Arizona. So interesting to have Dylan Cease a comment on Pedro Grifol. I have a lot of hope for Dylan Cease, that he can follow up on what he did last season, and maybe even, up a few notches. That maybe he could take some pressure off of Kopech and Giolito. Giolito working hard to return to accustomed levels, all the stuff that he's put in this past offseason, well documented. It's a prove it year for Lucas Giolito, and what kind of contract he's going to get after this. I don't see the Sox particularly, going after him. And it's a weird situation for the Sox, because if he does have a really good year and he gets into a top 10, top 5, dare I say, Cy Young, voting conversation, he's priced himself out of the Chicago White Sox regarding starting pitching, unless there's a completely different way they're going to be doing things all of a sudden, and Jerry Reinsdorf is going to decide to actually pay for pitching. And is that the guy you start with? I mean, do you bring Lucas Giolito back and say, well, he proved it, he had a great year, we're gonna retain him and give him a big contract? I don't know. Big questions for Giolito, big questions for Kopech. Hopefully that knee responds well and there are no limitations on his arm. So it'd be nice if Dylan Cease can follow up on what he did last year. He's going to be the ace of the staff. He's going to start opening day. Hopefully he stays healthy. And, he's not going to be participating in the World Baseball Classic. He's going to be focusing on what he needs to do to get ready for the 2023 season. So I have a lot of hope in Dylan Cease. Grifol, he gives me a lot of hope, following up with Jim. Grifol gives me hope because of the culture, he wants to create, and how different this team should be in terms of preparedness and strategy. I like the coaches that he has surrounded himself with. Grifol doesn't have the clout or the name recognition, but maybe he has a better way of motivating, and getting the most out of this group. It sure seems like that just small quote from Dylan Cease there, that he was very well respected around the rest of the league with all the other managerial openings. Now, the White Sox starting staff does not at all have the depth that I would have liked. We are still waiting on the Clevenger outcome, but despite all the question marks, the Sox received favorable marks recently. ESPN, I don't know if you saw this, ESPN rolled out their early starting pitching rankings last week, and they put the White Sox starting staff at 7th in all of baseball. This is what ESPN had to say. There are mostly slight differences between the pecking order of rotations generated by this method and by the forecast at Fangraphs, with teams generally landing within a handful of ranking spots from one approach to the other. The White Sox were one of the biggest departures in Chicago's favor, ESPN wrote. The projections see bounce backs for Lynn and Giolito, which has to happen for Chicago to really land here in the rotation hierarchy. The issue, though, is depth. Of course, the White Sox don't have it, and these numbers don't know what's going to happen with the recent investigation concerning newcomer Clevenger. So that all makes sense. I get all of that, and that is the way of all these projections. Very difficult to figure out, I think, the 2023 White Sox because of what happened last year in 2022 with all of the injuries and just, in terms of production, just falling completely off in all different kinds of ways. So how do you really project? It's almost this hope. You don't have a lot to go off of with some of these players because we just don't have a big sample size. They haven't been healthy enough to stay on the field. So it's really a prove it season for Giolito, and I think for Kopech too, and even Lynn. Hopefully that's used as motivation. That's the key. It's even if it's individual stuff for Giolito, I think it is. It's for him personally and hopefully we as a team benefit. Kind of reminds me of what happened with Carlos Rodon a couple seasons ago. That was a prove-it year for him, and he did, and he got himself paid, and look where he is right now. So, we'll see, but I do have a lot of hope in Dylan Cease, and I want to think that the starting pitching is, despite the depth, I do believe it could be a top 10, but we're waiting on the Clevenger situation. So Amber, appreciate you writing in. A lot of stuff from Amber, which I do appreciate. Amber worried about the high expectations, specifically on Vaughn, Benintendi, and Grifol. So Grifol sure has a ton on his shoulders. This team, I think, has got an AL elite nucleus. However, not enough was done, of course, over the offseason to patch up or figure out second base, right field, and the depth like we just previously talked about. But again, that core, well, what could happen with that core, the potential, and can Grifol change the way how things were done last year? Can Grifol, from a distance, him as a Kansas City Royals manager, or coach, I should say, but with the Royals organization for so long, and how he looked at the White Sox from a distance and said, okay, I see what's going on here. If I were in charge, this is what I would be doing. Now, it's one thing to say all of those things and have that plan. Can the players respond? And I think that's the big challenge for Grifol. Will he get these players to respond and buy in? So he has a ton of expectations. Now, if he succeeds, which is great, then Rick Hahn also succeeds, and that might be a whole different segment or a whole different episode. And that's a good thing. This is Hahn's guy, and Grifol's got a lot on his shoulders, but I think he's surrounded himself with the right people. Andrew Vaughn, I wouldn't want to be in Andrew Vaughn's shoes, especially if it's a struggle in April and May. Not like Jose Abreu was hitting the cover off the ball in April and May traditionally, but we know what kind of seasons Jose Abreu had throughout the summer and down the stretch. And an absolute White Sox legend has left. You're going to see number 79 retired at some point. You'll see a statue, I hope, somewhere on the concourse. Jose Abreu is gone. He's wearing another uniform. Can't worry about him too much. However, Andrew Vaughn will always be compared to Jose Abreu until Andrew Vaughn starts putting up, some solid numbers, and that might take a little while. My hope is that returning to first base, or I guess getting his first shot in the big leagues at first base full time, and him now seeing big league pitching for a couple of years. He's a bit of a veteran. He can deliver, and I'm not saying he's going to be a leader, but I just hope fans, take it easy on him just a little bit. But the temptation is going to be there. I think it's more directed at the front office of, look, this is what we've got now, and this is your making. But I believe in Andrew Vaughn. I call a while ago, I said this was going to be the year of Andrew Vaughn. And I do think he's going to have a very solid year if the back can stay healthy. That's the big worry, of course, health. This is the White Sox we're talking about. So if his back can stay right, I think you're going to see solid numbers. Absolutely. Benintendi, look, he's the big, off-season acquisition. He's the money man, the highest paid White Sox player in history. He's got a 5-year deal. He finally answers our left field position, lefty bat, no more shift. Is the hand healthy? I don't think we should look at him to carry this team. I'm looking more at Luis Robert and Eloy Jimenez, and I guess even Tim Anderson. But Andrew Benintendi is going to be just fine. If he's healthy and the hand's right, I really think he's going to be just fine. Thank you, Jim and Amber, for checking in on the mailbag. Hey, Jake Berger had some exciting moments in 2022. I'm going to tell you why making the roster is a tall task. More on that in a moment. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. The midway point of the NBA season is here, and now is the perfect time to download FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because new customers get a no-sweat first bet up to $1,000. That's bonus bets back if your first bet doesn't win. Just download the FanDuel Sportsbook app. It's safe, secure, and super easy to use. Then you can bet on everything from the money line to point scores and threes drained. Plus, FanDuel even lets you combine your bets for a chance at a bigger payout with a same game parlay. So don't miss the chance to get your no sweat first bet up to $1,000 in bonus bets when you go to fanduel.com/lockedon. That's fanduel.com/lockedon to learn more. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sports betting partner of the NBA. I've heard from a lot of folks over the last year or so, but specifically over the last couple of weeks. Luke and Michael uh, got in a question at LockedOnSox@gmail about Jake Burger. And essentially, it's like, what can we expect from Jake Burger in 2023? And Jake Burger has been through so much physically, mentally, well documented. Those Achilles injuries very early on in his career after he was drafted, thought maybe he was going to be, the future third baseman. Everybody loved his bat. We've seen some glimpses offensively. The defense hasn't quite been there. So what do you think the role of Jake Burger is going to be on this team? I mean, I have no idea. I've said to people, and I've had these conversations on my weekly White Sox podcast, Good Guys Talk Back, with my co-host Pat Hester, is, I mean, what have the Sox been doing? They're sitting on Jake Burger for these years, and maybe, other teams are a little standoffish. They don't want to take a risk on Jake Burger because they don't know of what they're getting. And I think it would have to be a rebuilding team, a team that's willing to take a risk on, hey, this guy's got some upside. We've got a hole at third base or at DH. We'll figure that out. I think you're going to have to package Jake Burger with somebody else if you're going to go after, another arm or even a proven second baseman. Anyway, Jake Burger has, he has had ups and downs, and we've seen some flashes last year. Scott Merkin recently came out with his roster predictions. And I trust Scott Merkin. He's seen a lot of spring training. He's seen a lot of White Sox baseball over the years. And this is what he had for the these utility players for the White Sox. He's got 3 utility players making the team. Leury Garcia, with that contract, and everything that Leury Garcia can potentially do. You're going to have Leury Garcia. Gavin Sheets, I understand that, with the shift being gone, that power lefty bat, that could be a platoon DH possibly. He might see some time in right field like Connor McKnight had hinted at. And then Victor Reyes was the other name that Merkin went with. And this is Merkin's justification. Garcia will play across the diamond, which represents his greatest value. Sheets provides true left-handed power, and the switch hitting Reyes would seem to have an edge over Billy Hamilton, Jake Marisnick, and Jake Burger as the 4th outfielder. So, obviously outfield, the lack of depth there, very concerning. Jake Marisnick is an interesting guy. I'm curious to see what his spring training is like. But Jake Burger's stuck. He does seem to be like a man without a home. Burger finished the season with 8 home runs, 9 doubles, and 26 RBIs, over 168 at-bats in 2022, and recorded the game-winning RBI in 4 consecutive White Sox victories from May 25th to June 5th. Those were exciting days. I remember that. Hopefully you do. That seems like forever ago, but I do remember that hot streak that Burger had. In 37 games, covering 326 innings at third. Last season, Burger committed 6 errors. And this is what Merkin had to say. Despite possibly being suited as a DH for 2023 for the White Sox, Burger also wants to be ready at third base, even with Yoan Moncada as the incumbent. And he has worked diligently this offseason to improve that defensive area of his game. This is what Burger had to say this past offseason. I had a stretch there where it was like I felt like every game I was making an error. And it's just controlling the mindset there. I know what type of player I am defensively. And if you let the 1 or 2 bad mistakes kind of eat at you, it just kind of spirals out of control. That's what happened this year. I was just trying to control that a little better, make it one small event after that, and then let it, instead of letting it spiral out of control. Obviously, it didn't help because it was in big situations, so errors are a little more magnified than they otherwise would be. I'm still very confident there's no one that is going to be harder on themselves than I am when it comes to that. I want to help the team win in any way, just kind of controlling that, realizing that, hey, let's move on. You got the next one, instead of thinking about that too much. Can Jake Burger play second base? With the new shift rules, you can't cheat. Tim Anderson can't even have a foot on the other side of second base. Or else if umpires are paying attention, there's some penalties with that. So you're not going to get help from a shortstop. You're not going to be able to scoot yourself into the outfield and play like a short right field as a second baseman. You're going to have range. I mean, you're covering that whole area seemingly on your own, from the second base bag to the first base bag. I don't know if Jake Burger's there. I don't think he is. It'll be an interesting camp. He's got to prove it. He's got a lot to prove. It just feels like he's stuck. He's stuck behind Moncada, and I do not want him defensively over Moncada. And I like Burger's bat, but what versatility do you bring defensively? Which the White Sox were horrible, obviously, defensively last year. So we'll see with Burger. I got a feeling right now, though, he is not going to make this team out of spring training. I go with Merck on that. If it's not Romy Gonzalez or Lenyn Sosa, could it be Biggio or Espinal from Toronto? Or maybe the Nick Madrigal trade will actually happen out in the desert. More on that in a moment. So I got this question last week, I believe, on the YouTube comments, and I appreciate it. It's about second base. And there are 7 different second basemen that were talked about here. If maybe these could be targets in some trade, or something could happen potentially still during spring training. It seems a little unlikely, but here are some of the names. And I've got these guys put in my order. Of these 7, this is kind of what I would like to see. And it's close of the pecking order, but Gavin Lux would be a top choice from the Los Angeles Dodgers. Then I've got Biggio from Toronto. And then right after that, Luis Guillermo from the New York Mets. And then Nicky Lopez from the Royals, which we talked about. There was that rumor a couple weeks ago, possibly with Nicky Lopez. And then you've got, after that, 5, 6, 7. They're all righties. So I kind of glump this group just as, I would really like a lefty batting second baseman. I want the lefty. So the righties, they kind of threw at the bottom. I got Santiago Espinal from Toronto. He's in my 5th spot, but I could kind of see him moving up a little bit. I was really impressed with what I saw from him when we played the Blue Jays. They've got a lot of great players. That Blue Jays team was fun to watch. I felt like they were able to score at will against us. And so I've got him in that 5 spot. 6 spot, David Fletcher from the Los Angeles Angels, a righty. And then 7th, I've got Nick Madrigal. Something about the whole situation, I'm not interested in a reunion with Nick Madrigal. I know Nick Madrigal might be a better option than Lenyn Sosa, and might even be a better option than Romy Gonzalez. But you know what? You went away from Madrigal. That's a reunion I really don't want to see. So I've got him bottom on my list. Lux, he had a pretty solid 2022 for the Dodgers. Career slash 253, 329, 383. None of these guys have any real power, but some solid stuff in games played from 2022. Biggio, not a great slash line. Played less, though, in 100 games. I like him out of Toronto, though, because I just like Toronto's ball club. And here we've got Charlie Montoya as our bench coach with Pedro Grifol, wondering what he's going to bring from his time with the Blue Jays. And then number 3, I've got Luis Guillermo. Again, played for a solid organization in the New York Mets. might not see a ton of playing time. A lefty, career slash 267, 354, and 334. Again, no real power out of these guys, but I'm looking for guys that, are proven second basemen. They could put the ball in play. If you're not going to go power, then, get on base. Absolutely. And I'm looking for a lefty bat. So that's kind of my 1 through 7 of those names that you threw out there. Appreciate that. And again, we're talking second base still. That's the issue. And I think that's going to be talked about. That's a storyline for sure. Anybody you talk to about the White Sox, it's right field, second base. What's going to happen with your bullpen if you're not talking about Pedro Grifol. So a lefty bat would be nice. The question here, and I've had this asked of me as well, as I'm sure you've probably asked this question too. Why doesn't Yoan Moncada just move to second base, go back to second, and Berger can play third? So I went through some stuff, some articles that I remember reading, and there was one from last offseason with Rick Hahn talking about that potential. And Rick Hahn, in his very Rick Hahn way, said, never say never. But look, he's a pretty darn good third baseman. He's comfortable there. He's an awfully good player. I don't know if you want to upset the apple cart of something that's working. Never say never. Great Hahn speak there. He continued, though, it may have to be repetition and maturity, but certainly he was more comfortable defensively, and his athleticism and instincts were more accessible at third base than they were at second. And this is what Ricky Renteria said way back in August of 2019. Remember, Ricky? I think the biggest concern everybody had when we first moved him to third was the nuances of playing third base would disrupt his offensive side. It was actually the opposite. I think it allowed him to focus a little bit more on both sides of the baseball. Some of the things we talked about in terms of when he played second were that he might become a little lackadaisical at times because it seemed kind of easy. He stays a little bit more focused at third. I thought that was a very interesting quote, although I have seen the lackadaisical stuff at third, but more focused at third, the reflexes, the attention. And Ricky Renteria is saying, I think it translated offensively, which is a good thing. So Moncada was a Gold Glove finalist in 2020. I think he can win a Gold Glove. I know I'm going to hear it from people. I know there's a lot of folks out there that are done with Yoan Moncada offensively for sure, and they don't think too much of his defense. He is a very good third baseman, though, and I understand. And have definitely participated, though, in the criticism, lazy at times, prone to injury when he's charging a slow roller, and sometimes is a bit too, nonchalant. But from what we've had over the years, after Creedy, there's been some duds at third base, and he plays the hot corner very well. If only his bat could pick it up, I think we can excuse some of the lackadaisical stuff. And I hope he's improved that, but I wouldn't be surprised if he's right back in that Gold Glove conversation. But you're going to see Yoan Moncada staying at third. Berger's not going to go to second. It's going to be a battle. I honestly, at the end of it, I think it's going to be between Gonzalez and Sosa. And I think Gonzalez takes it because he's got more big league experience, but that will definitely be something we are all watching. Hey, really appreciate all the questions, comments, predictions, whether it's through YouTube comments or on social media, on Twitter, or through the Locked On Sox at Gmail. I really, really appreciate it. Folks, thank you so very much for making this podcast part of your daily routine. You can find the Locked On White Sox podcast absolutely everywhere you find your podcast. We're on Twitter at Locked On Sox. You can find me on Twitter at Nick_GGTB. Hey, and don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel. We are less than 10 subscribers away from that magical 1,000 mark. Thanks for making Locked On White Sox your first listen. Now make your second listen the Locked On MLB Prospects. Host Lindsey Crosby is a prospect encyclopedia, and he's going deep on the MLB stars of tomorrow. It's free and available wherever you get your podcasts. Coming up on the next episode, I'll continue to be looking at off-season scenarios as we are now waiting for position players to report on February 20th in Glendale, Arizona. Appreciate you making time for the Locked On White Sox podcast. I'm Nick Morawski. Until next time, go Sox.